The galaxy was vast, endless, and full of countless civilizations that had long believed themselves safe from any new danger. For centuries, the great empires and councils had ruled the stars, trading, fighting, and plotting among themselves. Humanity, a small and ignored species from a blue world called Earth, was never taken seriously. They were seen as young, unimportant, and far too primitive to matter in the affairs of the galaxy. But all of that began to change when a strange signal was detected at the edge of known space. The signal was faint at first, but powerful machines quickly locked onto it. It was not a natural wave, not a broken broadcast, but something deliberate, heavy, and filled with codes no one could read. The origin was clear: Earth. The council chambers grew tense as the signal was studied. The alien delegates whispered to one another. Why would humanity send a signal like this? They had no powerful fleet, no great colonies, no empire to command. Some laughed, saying the humans were trying to be noticed, nothing more. Others shifted uneasily, for there was something in the signal, a deep rhythm, a pattern that felt less like a message and more like a warning. As debates raged in the council, more disturbing news arrived. Scanners at the rim of space had picked up something large moving away from Earth's orbit. At first, analysts thought it was an asteroid or a mining station. But as the object's shape became clear, the laughter stopped. It was a ship, larger than anything humanity was ever believed to possess. Its frame stretched longer than the largest council dreadnoughts, its armor thick and black like a shadow against the stars. And it was moving fast. The word spread quickly among the stars: humanity had built a battleship. Fear began to whisper its way across the galaxy. How had humanity, a species ignored for so long, constructed such a war machine in silence? Spies scrambled to answer, but no one had an explanation. Alien governments accused one another of helping the humans, but there was no proof. What was certain was that the ship was real, and it was on the move. Entire systems began to watch the skies with dread. The ship jumped for the first time, vanishing in a burst of light, then reappearing near the outer colonies of a trading empire. The readings from its engines shook even the oldest scientists. Nothing in the galaxy matched its speed or efficiency. Ships were sent to follow it, but they returned with little more than terror in their logs. The human battleship traveled silently, its weapons hidden, its purpose unknown. Yet the silence was more frightening than open war. If humanity wanted peace, why build such a monster? And if they wanted war, why reveal it now? Leaders argued endlessly, but the people of the galaxy felt only one thing: unease. In dark halls and hidden chambers, the stories began to grow. Merchants whispered of entire patrols vanishing when the ship passed by. Explorers claimed to have seen it moving like a shadow, too fast to track. Children on alien worlds began to draw pictures of a black ship blotting out the stars. Rumors turned to fear, and fear turned to regret. For so long, the galaxy had ignored Earth. They had treated humans as weak, as irrelevant, as nothing more than noise in the grand stage of the stars. But now, for the first time, they wondered if their arrogance had been a mistake. As the battleship moved further into space, its signal still echoing across every scanner, the galaxy watched with growing horror. The ship had not fired a single weapon, yet its presence was enough to freeze entire fleets in place. The council chambers filled with arguments, desperate voices calling for calm, others demanding immediate action. But deep inside, every leader felt the same cold truth pressing down on them. Humanity had changed. They were no longer the weak species to be mocked. They had built something that should not exist. And if this was only one ship, then how many more waited unseen? The galaxy did not know the answer. They only knew one thing: the meaning of fear had returned to the stars. And it had come from Earth. Whispers of fear began to spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The human battleship had been seen moving through space, silent and unstoppable, and the news traveled faster than any ship could jump. In trading ports, miners stopped their work to whisper about it. On distant colony worlds, people asked one another if the rumors were true. Entire governments called emergency meetings, their leaders arguing late into the night. Some still laughed, calling it impossible. They said humanity was too small, too weak, too poor to build such a machine. But others remembered fragments of history, the bloody records of Earth's past wars, where humans had fought each other with a savagery no alien could understand. They remembered how humans survived against impossible odds, adapting, fighting, never surrendering. Those who knew that history began to feel something cold in their bones. The signal that came with the battleship was still unsolved. No translator could break its code. Some thought it was a challenge, others a threat. A few suggested it was simply noise, but even they felt uneasy, for the rhythm of the message sounded too deliberate, too human. Fleets were dispatched to investigate. Scouts were ordered to shadow the battleship and report back. Most never returned. One ship, battered and broken, did manage to send a final transmission before its engines failed. The alien crew spoke with shaking voices, their eyes wide with terror. "We saw it," the commander said, voice heavy with dread. "We saw the human battleship. It moved without effort, and when we tried to scan it, our systems burned out. Nothing touched it, nothing slowed it. And when it turned toward us, we felt it. It was like the ship itself was watching." The transmission cut off there, but it was enough. The recording was replayed in council chambers, and silence filled the room. No one laughed anymore. The idea that humanity had built such a thing was no longer a rumor. It was truth. Regret began to grow among the leaders of the great empires. For centuries, humanity had been ignored, mocked, treated as a lesser race unworthy of respect. They had been denied membership in the council, their voices silenced whenever they tried to speak. And now, perhaps, this battleship was their answer. Alien worlds panicked. On one frontier planet, civilians rioted in fear, believing the battleship would come for them next. On another, governments rushed to prepare defenses, though deep down they knew it would not matter. The more stories spread, the darker the image of the battleship became. Some said its armor absorbed light, others claimed it could appear anywhere at will. None of these things could be proven, but none could be denied either, and that uncertainty was worse than truth. In secret meetings, alliances began to form. Old enemies who had once fought over borders now whispered about joining forces. Their fear of the battleship was greater than their hatred of one another. But trust was thin, and suspicion ran deep. Each race feared the others would betray them, just as much as they feared the humans. And still, through it all, humanity remained silent. No broadcast came from Earth. No declaration, no warning, no promise of peace or war. Only the signal, repeating endlessly, echoing through the void. That silence was what broke the galaxy most of all. If the humans had spoken, perhaps fear could have been eased. But without words, imagination filled the void, and imagination made the battleship into a monster. In one great library world, scholars searched through ancient records, desperate to find a clue. They compared the new human technology to old designs, but nothing matched. Humanity's science had leapt ahead of everything known, and no one understood how. The unanswered question haunted everyone. If one battleship existed, how many others were waiting in the dark? On mining stations, workers refused to board their ships. On colony worlds, civilians begged to be evacuated. Entire trade routes collapsed out of fear that the battleship might appear along them. The galaxy itself was starting to slow, paralyzed by whispers of this single ship. For the first time in generations, the mighty empires of the stars felt powerless. And in their private thoughts, their leaders wondered the same thing. If humanity had truly built this warship in secret, then what else had they built that no one had seen? The fear was no longer just about a battleship. It was about what humanity had become. And with each passing day, regret spread further across the stars, heavy and unstoppable, as the galaxy realized it might be far too late to undo the past. The galaxy's leaders finally decided that waiting in fear was worse than taking action. A proud fleet was assembled, commanded by one of the most decorated admirals of the council, a warrior who had never lost a battle. He mocked the rumors of the human battleship, calling it nothing more than a trick to scare weaker minds. With 1,000 ships under his command, He promised to hunt the vessel down and crush it. His speeches were broadcast across his empire, his voice full of confidence. Yet behind the bravado, not all of his officers shared his faith. Some had heard the survivors' recordings, others had studied the strange signal from Earth, and they were not so certain. Still, orders were orders, and the fleet prepared for war. They moved into deep space, engines burning, weapons charged, ready to meet humanity for the first time in open battle. When they arrived at the sector where the human battleship had last been seen, space felt unnaturally quiet. The admiral laughed, saying the humans were cowards who had fled, but then the scanners picked up something. A massive object, larger than any ship they had ever seen, emerged from the void. Its black armor gleamed faintly against the stars, a silent giant drifting with purpose. The alien fleet locked their weapons, yet the battleship did nothing. It did not fire, it did not move aggressively, it simply watched. This silence unsettled the officers more than any open attack could have. The admiral ordered the first volley. Hundreds of plasma bolts and missiles streaked through the void, slamming into the battleship's hull. But when the light cleared, the massive ship still floated, untouched. The admiral shouted in disbelief and ordered a second strike, then a third, unleashing everything his fleet had. The result was the same. The human battleship had not even raised its shields, yet no weapon left so much as a scratch on its surface. Then the silence broke. The battleship moved. Its engines flared once, and in an instant, it was among them. The fleet scrambled, ships breaking formation as the battleship unleashed its fury. A single beam of white light shot out, and an entire squadron vanished in a flash. A swarm of drones deployed from hidden bays, moving faster than fighters, tearing through ships with precision strikes. Alien commanders shouted desperate orders, but none of it mattered. The human battleship was not just fighting, it was hunting. Entire cruisers were cut in half, carriers exploded, dreadnoughts that had once been symbols of power were reduced to wreckage in moments. And through it all, the battleship never seemed to strain. Its movements were calm, measured, almost effortless, as though it was not fighting a battle but conducting a test. The alien admiral watched in horror as his proud fleet, once thought unstoppable, crumbled around him. His communications filled with screams, desperate calls for help, and static as ships were wiped out one after another. He tried to rally his forces, ordering them to focus fire on a single point, but nothing worked. The battleship's armor deflected everything, its counterattacks devastating anything that tried to resist. In less than an hour, a fleet of 1,000 ships had been reduced to wreckage drifting through the void. The admiral, shaken and broken, recorded one last message before his flagship was destroyed. His voice trembled as he spoke. "This is no ship. This is not a weapon that belongs to any sane species. This is extinction wrapped in steel. We were wrong about the humans. We were all wrong." His words were the last the council ever heard from him. The human battleship drifted silently among the wreckage, scanning the remains, then turned away as if the destruction it had caused was nothing more than a minor exercise. Survivors who escaped told the story again and again, spreading fear even faster than the sight of the ship itself. They said the battleship had not even revealed its full power, that its weapons had been used sparingly, as if it had been holding back. The survivors whispered that humanity had built something far beyond war. They had built a nightmare. And the galaxy, for the first time, began to realize that their greatest armies, their proudest fleets, were nothing compared to what Earth had unleashed. The battleship had shown itself, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Panic spread across the stars like a storm no one could control. The destruction of the great fleet was no longer a rumor, but a fact carved into the wreckage that now drifted silently in space. Survivors fled in broken ships, carrying tales of horror back to their homeworlds. Every retelling made the story darker. They spoke of beams that erased entire squadrons in a single flash, of drones faster than light, of weapons that seemed to bend the very laws of nature. They said the human battleship had fought with only a fraction of its power, as if the battle had been nothing but a test. These words spread through colonies, trade hubs, and even the hidden worlds of smugglers. The more the story was told, the greater the fear grew. Whole planets began to panic. On one frontier world, millions tried to flee, overwhelming their ports and ships. On another, entire governments collapsed under the weight of terror. And yet through all of this, humanity remained silent. No message came, no threat, no demand. The battleship drifted across systems like a shadow, always moving, always watching, but never speaking. That silence was worse than war. It made the galaxy believe that humanity no longer needed words, that their ship itself was the only language they spoke now. Civilizations that had once mocked Earth now begged for peace, sending desperate messages into the void, pleading for mercy. But no reply came. The battleship ignored them all. The Galactic Council held meeting after meeting, but unity was impossible. Some leaders wanted to surrender to humanity immediately, to throw themselves at Earth's mercy before it was too late. Others argued that the galaxy must fight, must stand together and resist, or else they would all fall one by one. But deep inside, even the bravest of them feared the truth. Perhaps nothing could stand against humanity now. Meanwhile, rumors spread of smaller fleets vanishing near the edges of space. Merchants claimed to have seen flashes in the dark, as if other human ships were moving unseen. None of these stories could be proven, but none could be dismissed either. Fear magnified them until the entire galaxy was convinced that humanity had not just one battleship, but many. In marketplaces, people whispered of an entire human armada hidden beyond the stars, waiting for the right moment to strike. Fear turned into paranoia. Allies accused one another of secretly working with the humans. Old rivalries flared into new conflicts as trust broke apart. But all of it seemed pointless, for no matter how loudly they argued, the battleship remained the silent reminder that nothing else mattered. On one rich trade world, the population awoke to see the battleship hanging in orbit above them, blocking out the sun. It did not fire, it did not demand tribute, it simply floated there for 3 days, silent and unmoving, before vanishing into the void once more. The people of that world never forgot it. They called it the 3 days of shadow, and many believed humanity had only been measuring their reaction. Across the stars, that silence began to feel like judgment. Every empire, every civilization, wondered if they were being weighed, measured, and tested, just as the destroyed fleet had been. Some alien leaders tried to form alliances in secret. They gathered fleets, stockpiled weapons, and prepared desperate plans, believing that sooner or later humanity would attack openly. But others began to whisper the opposite, that resistance would only bring more destruction, and the only hope was submission. Fear fractured the galaxy. Yet the most terrifying thing was that no one knew what the humans wanted. If they had demanded control, the galaxy might have understood. If they had asked for tribute, they might have paid. But with nothing spoken, nothing declared, only the vast and silent presence of the battleship, the galaxy was left to drown in its own uncertainty. Day by day, system by system, fear turned into regret. The aliens remembered how they had laughed at Earth, how they had dismissed the humans as weak and unimportant. Now, with every whisper of the battleship, they began to understand how foolish that arrogance had been. The silence from Earth was the loudest sound in the galaxy, and it haunted every corner of the stars. The Galactic Council gathered in their grand chamber, a place that had once been filled with pride, arrogance, and endless debates about power. Now it was filled with fear. The destruction of the Great Fleet had broken the illusion of control, and even the most powerful empires sat in uneasy silence. Their leaders could not hide the truth any longer. Humanity had built something far beyond their understanding, and the galaxy no longer knew how to respond. For centuries, they had treated Earth as weak and unworthy, denying them a seat in the council, refusing to share knowledge, mocking their small fleets and colonies. Now every word, every insult, every dismissal felt like a mistake that could never be undone. One by one, the leaders spoke. Some demanded that the galaxy surrender at once, before the battleship unleashed its full power. They said survival was more important than pride. Others shouted in anger, claiming that to surrender was to admit defeat before even trying. They argued that the galaxy still had numbers, still had fleets, still had weapons. If they stood together, perhaps they could resist. But deep inside, every voice trembled, because none of them truly believed their weapons would work. The council grew desperate. Spies were sent to Earth, hoping to uncover secrets, but they never returned. Scientists were ordered to study every scrap of data from the battleship, but all reports ended with the same words: technology unknown, beyond current limits. The signal from Earth still echoed across the stars, unchanged, unsolved, and every hour it played, it reminded the galaxy of their ignorance. Then came the worst news. Scouts reported that the battleship was moving again, its course clear. It was headed toward a council world, one of the shining centers of civilization, filled with billions of lives and guarded by a fleet of defenders. Panic erupted in the chamber. Some leaders shouted to evacuate immediately. Others refused, saying that if humanity truly wanted war, there was no safe place to run. Fear spread like fire. The question on everyone's mind was the same: why was the battleship coming? Was it to destroy, to conquer, or to deliver a message? Regret weighed heavily in that moment. They thought back to all the chances they had to welcome Earth into their ranks, to treat them as equals. Instead, they had dismissed humanity, believing themselves untouchable. Now the galaxy's arrogance had brought them to the edge of ruin. Armadas were gathered in a desperate attempt to stop the battleship. Old rivals who had fought each other for centuries now agreed to fight side by side, not out of trust but out of shared fear. Massive fleets were positioned near the council world, thousands of ships lined in formation, their weapons primed. Generals gave speeches about courage and duty, but their soldiers could see the fear in their eyes. Across the stars, civilians watched in silence, their hearts heavy with dread. Entire worlds prayed to gods long forgotten, hoping that something, anything, could save them from what was coming. Yet in every prayer, in every whispered hope, regret lingered. The galaxy finally understood the cost of ignoring humanity, but they feared it was too late to change the future. As the human battleship drew closer, silent and unstoppable, the galaxy braced itself for the greatest battle in history. They did not know if they would survive. They only knew one thing for certain: regret had already spread across the stars, and soon the price of that regret would be paid in blood and fire. The fleets of the galaxy assembled in the largest formation ever seen, thousands upon thousands of ships drawn from every empire, every corner of known space. War banners that once faced one another in endless rivalry now flew side by side, united not by friendship but by fear. At the heart of this armada floated the council world, its skies filled with orbital defenses, its cities trembling under the weight of what was to come. The people watched in silence as the great war machine of the galaxy prepared for battle, yet deep down, none of them believed it would be enough. The human battleship approached like a shadow drifting across the stars. No escort, no warning, no message. It came alone, silent and calm, as though the entire galaxy's might was no more threatening than dust before the wind. The fleets locked their weapons, targeting systems screaming with activity, and commanders shouted their orders. The moment the battleship crossed into their trap, the sky exploded with fire. Beams, torpedoes, plasma storms, and experimental weapons unleashed together, the combined fury of 1,000 civilizations striking at once. The light was so bright it blinded sensors, and for a moment, the council dared to hope. But when the glare faded, the hope vanished with it. The battleship still floated there, untouched. Not a scratch marked its armor. The commanders shouted for another volley, and the fleets obeyed. Again and again, the galaxy unleashed its fury, but it was as if the battleship existed beyond their reach. No shield flickered, no system failed, nothing even shook. Then, at last, the battleship moved. Its engines flared with impossible power, and it cut through the armada like a blade through smoke. Entire squadrons vanished under a single beam of light, dreadnoughts that had stood for centuries split in half in a moment, carriers filled with fighters torn apart before they could even launch. From its hull poured swarms of drones, each one small but faster and deadlier than any fighter the galaxy had ever known. They weaved through the chaos with perfect precision, dismantling ships piece by piece, as though every weakness had been mapped long before the battle began. The fleets tried to regroup, tried to rally, but the battleship seemed to be everywhere at once. A massive flagship, leading 3 empires, attempted to ram the human vessel in desperation, but it was reduced to ash before it came close. Every strategy, every plan, every desperate move was met with merciless efficiency. The galaxy's greatest warriors screamed in defiance, but their voices were lost in the void as their ships became wreckage. Hours passed, though to those who survived, it felt like minutes. By the end, the once proud fleets were nothing but drifting ruins, burning fragments scattered across the stars. The Council world's defenses, so carefully built, so proudly displayed, were torn apart as if they had never existed. And yet, through all of this, the battleship showed no sign of exhaustion. It fought with the same calm, unhurried precision as before, as though it was never in danger, as though all of this destruction was nothing more than a demonstration. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the slaughter stopped. The battleship ceased fire. Its drones returned, vanishing back into hidden bays. It floated once more in silence, surrounded by the shattered remains of the galaxy's pride. Survivors watched in stunned disbelief, waiting for the final strike, waiting for the world below to burn. But it did not come. The battleship simply turned, its engines igniting once more, and left the battlefield behind. No explanation, no words, no message. Only silence. That silence was worse than any attack. The galaxy understood then that humanity did not need to conquer, did not need to demand. They had shown their power, and that was enough. Fear settled deeper than ever before. The Council, broken and humiliated, could no longer deny the truth. The galaxy's might had been shattered in a single battle, and humanity's battleship had walked away untouched. From that day on, every leader, every soldier, every civilian carried the same haunting thought. If this was only one ship, then what else had Earth built in the shadows? The question spread like fire, and no answer could ease the terror it brought. The galaxy's pride had been destroyed, and humanity's silence was louder than war. The ruins of the great battle still drifted in space, silent reminders of the galaxy's failure. Survivors carried their broken ships home, their voices trembling as they spoke of what they had seen. The Council, humiliated and shattered, demanded answers. They needed to know what humanity wanted, why Earth had unleashed such a nightmare upon them. For weeks, spies searched for signals, scientists dissected fragments of destroyed drones, and leaders pored over every shred of data. Yet every report ended in the same conclusion: unknown, beyond current technology. The mystery only deepened the fear. Then, one day, a transmission was captured. It was faint, encoded in human language, and at first no alien could read it. But with effort, the Council's best translators managed to break a portion of the message. What they found stunned them. Humanity had not demanded surrender. They had not called for conquest. The message was simple, almost quiet: we seek respect. We seek freedom. We will not kneel. The words spread through the council chamber like a fire. Some leaders scoffed, unable to believe that all this destruction had been caused not for power or territory but for dignity. Others trembled, realizing what it meant. Humanity had been silent because they did not need to speak. Their battleship was their voice. For centuries, the galaxy had mocked them, denied them, treated them as nothing. Now Earth had answered with steel and fire. The message was not one of war, it was a warning. They would not be ignored again. Regret grew heavier across the stars as the truth became clear. If the Council had treated humanity with respect from the beginning, perhaps none of this would have happened. Now their arrogance had birthed a terror greater than anything they had ever known. Across alien worlds, civilians whispered about the battleship not as a weapon but as a symbol. Children drew its shape in the sand, priests spoke of it as a judgment, and soldiers told each other that it was not just a machine but the will of humanity itself. The fear had changed into something deeper, an understanding. The Council tried to hide the message, but it spread anyway. The galaxy knew now that humanity had fought not for conquest but for recognition, and that knowledge stung worse than defeat. They had brought this fate upon themselves. On the Council world, debates raged. Some leaders argued that they must bow to humanity, grant them the respect they demanded before worse could happen. Others still clung to pride, unwilling to admit their failure. They whispered of building new weapons, of creating fleets with technology stolen from the wreckage. But even as they spoke, they knew the truth. Nothing they could build would rival what they had seen. The battleship had fought calmly, without strain, as though holding back its true power. If humanity had wanted to end them, they would already be ashes. The silence from Earth became heavier than ever. No more transmissions came, no more signals. The battleship itself vanished into the void, leaving no trace. To the galaxy, this silence was unbearable. Every empire waited in dread, wondering when, or if, the humans would return. On some worlds, rebellion broke out. People accused their leaders of bringing this disaster by mocking humanity in the first place. Statues of old rulers were torn down, replaced with crude carvings of the black battleship. Fear had turned into worship. Others prepared for the end, believing humanity would one day unleash their full might and erase the galaxy. But in the quiet corners of space, a few began to whisper a different thought. Maybe the humans did not want destruction. Maybe they only wanted to be left alone, free from the arrogance of others. If that was true, then perhaps there was still hope. Yet even those voices trembled, for no one truly knew the mind of humanity anymore. They had revealed their power, but not their heart. And until they spoke again, the galaxy would live in uncertainty, fear, and regret. The truth of humanity had been revealed, and it was not weakness, not submission, but a demand carved in steel. They were no longer a species to be ignored. They were a force that could not be denied. And every star in the galaxy now understood that one human battleship was enough to change the course of history forever. The galaxy had fallen into silence after the battleship vanished. Worlds that once rang with laughter and arrogance now echoed with fear and regret. Trade routes that had always been full of ships grew quiet, as merchants refused to risk traveling through the dark void where the human vessel might appear. Armies that once paraded their power now hid in orbit, no longer eager to display their strength. The memory of the great fleet's destruction haunted every corner of civilization. Humanity had spoken without words, and the message was carved into the minds of all who lived among the stars. On the council world, leaders sat in despair. Their mighty alliance, built over centuries, had been torn apart in hours. No plan remained, no strategy gave hope. Some leaders argued that they should beg humanity for forgiveness, even if it meant surrendering their pride. Others said that humanity's silence was the true answer, that Earth had no interest in ruling them. But all agreed on one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The common people felt it even more deeply. In the markets, whispers spread that the battleship would return if the galaxy dared to mock Earth again. On mining worlds, workers refused to continue without new protections, though none believed such protections would matter. On colony planets, children played games pretending to be the human battleship, scattering entire alien fleets with a single wave of their hand. Humanity had become legend, and legends were always more powerful than truth. Regret was everywhere. The galaxy remembered every insult, every dismissal, every time Earth had been silenced in the council chamber. They remembered the laughter when humanity's first ships were mocked as primitive. They remembered the arrogance when humans asked for recognition and were denied. Now those memories felt like chains around their throats. If only they had listened, if only they had treated Earth as an equal, perhaps the battleship would never have been built. But regret could not rewrite the past. On a distant world, an alien scholar stood before her students and told them a story. She spoke of a time when the galaxy believed itself untouchable, only to be humbled by the very species it had ignored. Her voice was heavy as she ended the tale with a warning. Fear is not the gift humanity gave us. Regret is. We are living in the shadow of our own arrogance. The students listened in silence, for they knew her words were true. Across the stars, civilizations struggled to decide their future. Should they rebuild their fleets, hoping one day to challenge humanity again? Or should they disarm and pray that the battleship never returned? No choice seemed safe, no path offered comfort. The uncertainty was as deadly as any weapon. Then, without warning, the signal from Earth stopped. The coded transmission that had echoed endlessly through the void went silent. Some celebrated, believing the danger had passed. Others grew even more afraid, for silence could mean many things. Perhaps the humans no longer needed to speak because their message had already been delivered. Perhaps they were watching, waiting to see if the galaxy had learned its lesson. Perhaps the silence itself was the greatest warning of all. In that silence, the galaxy finally understood the true cost of their arrogance. They had lived for centuries believing themselves masters of the stars, believing no young species could ever rise to challenge them. And yet it had happened. Not through conquest, not through diplomacy, but through a single ship that had shown them what humanity could do when pushed too far. The council chamber closed its doors, the leaders retreating into endless arguments that solved nothing. But among the people, a truth spread like fire. Humanity did not need to conquer them. Humanity had already won. Fear would linger in every decision, regret would haunt every leader, and the shadow of the battleship would never fade. The galaxy knew that if they crossed Earth again, if they dared to repeat the mistakes of the past, the price would be higher than they could bear. And so regret spread across the stars, heavier than chains, deeper than wounds, shaping the future of every world. For though the battleship had vanished into the void, its presence remained in every mind, a silent reminder that the age of mocking humanity was over forever.